In March 1897, a doctor's report sent to the Journal of Heredity wrote about a family in the countryside of Kentucky whose story puzzled doctors and scientists. The mother was barely 4 feet tall. The father weighed over 500 pounds. Together, they had 12 children, and according to hospital records kept in the Louisville Medical Archives, every single one of them was born with serious physical problems. Samuel Garrett had worked as a doctor in Harlan County, Kentucky for nearly 15 years when a farmer came to his office on a cold morning in March 1897. The man looked very uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he described a family living in the hollow beyond Pine Mountain. According to the farmer, something was deeply wrong with every child in that household. Garrett had heard whispers about the family before and dismissed them as country superstition, but the farmer's insistence seemed strong enough to check it out. The journey took most of a day. Garrett's horse struggled along narrow paths carved into the mountainside, through thick forests of oak and hickory trees that blocked out the afternoon sun. When he finally reached the homestead, what he found stopped him cold. The home itself was simple but well kept, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. But it was the woman who came out to greet him that first caught his attention. She stood no higher than a child of 8 or 9 years old, but her body proportions were those of an adult, squeezed into a frame that seemed biologically impossible. Inside, the doctor met her husband. The man sat in a reinforced chair near the fireplace, his body spreading across a space meant for 3 normal-sized adults. Garrett guessed his weight at well over 500 pounds, noticing the difficult breathing, the swollen joints, and the skin stretched tight across impossible dimensions. Around them moved children of different ages, and each one showed visible signs of developmental problems. The oldest girl, perhaps 14, walked with a severe curve in her spine that twisted her body nearly sideways. 2 boys, twins by their identical features, had clubbed feet so extreme they moved by dragging themselves across the floor. A younger child had hands with fingers fused together into paddle-like shapes. Another had a skull misshapen to the point that Garrett questioned how the brain inside could work at all. Yet work it did. The children spoke, did chores, and showed awareness and personality despite their severe physical limitations. Garrett spent 3 hours doing examinations with the parents' permission, filling his notebook with observations that became increasingly disturbing. Every child showed multiple problems. Some had bone deformities combined with organ displacement that his training told him should be impossible to survive. Others showed signs of conditions he had only read about in the most rare medical books. The parents themselves, while cooperative, seemed resigned to their situation, as if they had long ago accepted that their children would never be normal. As darkness fell and Garrett prepared to leave, the mother asked a question that would haunt him for years. Could medicine explain why God had cursed them so? The doctor had no answer. He had seen many things in his career, but nothing had prepared him for a family where genetic disaster seemed to be not the exception, but the absolute rule. Dr. Garrett returned to his office, obsessed with understanding how such a union had come to exist. Over the following weeks, he conducted interviews with the parents separately, learning histories that read like case studies in medical impossibility. The mother, whom he recorded in his notes as Sarah Pennington, had been born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1871. Hospital records from Children's Hospital of Cincinnati, which Garrett later got through letters, documented her diagnosis at age 3, primordial dwarfism, a condition so rare that fewer than 24 cases had been recorded in American medical books at that time. Sarah's childhood medical file painted a picture of constant examination. Doctors had measured every aspect of her development, noting that while her mind seemed normal, her body refused to grow beyond the size of a small child. By age 12, she had reached her final height of 3 feet 11 inches. The records also revealed something darker. Her family, unable to cope with the curiosity and cruelty their daughter attracted, had basically abandoned her to the care of a religious charity organization when she turned 15. The charity, based in Louisville, Kentucky, operated a home for people considered unmarriageable or unable to support themselves. It was there in 1888 that Sarah met the man who would become her husband. His name, according to county marriage records, was Benjamin Caldwell, and his own medical history proved equally extraordinary. Benjamin had been born in 1865 to a farming family in Breathitt County, Kentucky. For the first 12 years of his life, he appeared completely normal. Then something in his body went terribly wrong. His mother's diary, which Garrett later discovered through the family, described the transformation with mounting horror. Benjamin began eating enormous amounts of food but never felt satisfied. His weight doubled within a year, then doubled again. By age 16, he weighed 300 pounds. By 20, he exceeded 400. A doctor in Lexington examined him in 1887 and diagnosed what he called a pituitary dysfunction. Though the medical understanding of such conditions remained basic, the doctor's report preserved in the Kentucky Medical Society archives noted that Benjamin's body seemed unable to control its own growth signals. His appetite was insatiable, his metabolism broken, and his skeleton struggling to support the growing mass. Benjamin's family had tried everything. Restricted diets that left him writhing in hunger, herbal remedies from local healers, even a brutal routine of forced physical labor that only exhausted him without reducing his weight. By 1888, his father made a devastating decision. Unable to care for a son who ate resources meant for 6 people and could no longer do farm work, he arranged for Benjamin's placement in the same Louisville charity home that housed Sarah. The two outcasts found each other in that grim institution. Sarah saw beyond Benjamin's enormous size to the gentle man trapped inside. Benjamin, for the first time in years, met someone who did not pull away from his presence. The charity administrators, perhaps relieved to reduce their burden, permitted the marriage in 1889. The couple left Louisville with donated supplies and made their way to the most remote hollow they could find in Harlan County, where Benjamin's distant cousins reluctantly allowed them to build a cabin on unused land. What Garrett found most troubling in his research was not the individual conditions, but their combination. Both parents carried genetic problems so severe they had made normal life impossible. Both had been cast out by families overwhelmed by their needs. Both had retreated to the mountains where society's judgment could not reach them. And both, through either ignorance or desperation or simply human need for family, had chosen to have children. The medical books of 1897 offered no guidance for such a scenario. Heredity remained a poorly understood science. Gregor Mendel's work on genetic inheritance, published decades earlier, had been largely ignored by the medical establishment. No one could predict what might happen when two people carrying such extreme genetic problems attempted to create life together. Sarah and Benjamin had unknowingly become the kind of tragic experiment nature itself sometimes conducts, one that medicine could only try to understand. As Garrett closed his notebook after documenting their histories, he understood that what he was witnessing might be unprecedented in medical science. The question that tormented him was simple: had anyone thought to warn them what might happen? And if they had known, would they have chosen differently? Sarah discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1890. The local midwife, Martha Coombs, recorded the event in her detailed logbook, now preserved in the Harlan County Historical Society. What began as cautious hope transformed into dread as the pregnancy progressed. Sarah's already tiny frame struggled to hold the growing child. By her 6th month, she could barely walk. Benjamin himself, largely immobile, could offer little physical help. The birth in January 1891 nearly killed her. Martha's notes described a labor lasting 36 hours, complicated by Sarah's narrow pelvis and the infant's unusual position. When the boy finally emerged, Martha's experienced hands detected the problem immediately. His feet curved inward so severely that the soles faced each other. The ankle bones twisted at angles nature never intended. The condition, known as talipes equinovarus, was severe enough that Martha doubted the child would ever walk normally. They named him James. Despite his deformed feet, he nursed and grew. Sarah wept with relief that he lived, choosing to see survival as blessing enough. But when she became pregnant again barely 6 months later, Martha voiced concerns that Sarah dismissed. The second child, a girl born in May 1892, arrived with similar clubbed feet, plus something new. Her spine curved unnaturally to the left, creating a hump between her shoulder blades that worsened as she aged. Word began spreading through the isolated communities dotting those mountains. Families who had initially shown neighborly kindness grew distant when Sarah gave birth to twin boys in March 1893, and both emerged with skull deformities that left their heads misshapen and foreheads grotesquely prominent. The whispers turned to open judgment. One woman told Martha that God was punishing unnatural unions, that people like Sarah and Benjamin should never have been allowed to marry. Martha's logbook entries grew increasingly clinical, as if emotional distance might protect her from what she was witnessing. The twins, whom the parents named David and Daniel, displayed matching problems: oversized heads, eyes set too far apart, and mental development that lagged months behind normal infants. Yet they too survived, adding their cries to the increasingly chaotic household. The 4th pregnancy terrified Martha. She urged Sarah to stop, explaining in terms as gentle as she could manage that each birth brought worse afflictions. Sarah refused to discuss it. Whether from religious conviction, denial, or simply acceptance of circumstances beyond her control, she carried the child to term. The girl, born in November 1894, had hands unlike anything Martha had documented before. The fingers had failed to separate properly during development, leaving paddle-like shapes with only slight indentations where individual digits should have been. By this point, neighboring families had stopped visiting entirely. Children were forbidden from approaching the Caldwell property, with parents warning that whatever curse afflicted that family might somehow spread. The general store owner in the nearest settlement began refusing to extend credit, forcing Benjamin's cousins to make supply runs on the family's behalf. The isolation became nearly absolute. Martha continued attending the births, driven by professional obligation and perhaps a grim fascination with documenting what medical science had never seen. Her notes from this period reveal internal conflict. She described feeling complicit in ongoing tragedy, yet also recognized that without her assistance, both mothers and infants would likely die. The moral weight of enabling these pregnancies while watching each child emerge more damaged than the last clearly tormented her. What the logbook makes devastatingly clear is that by 1895, everyone involved understood the pattern. Each pregnancy produced a child with severe abnormalities. Each birth compounded the family's isolation. Each new infant represented both a life saved and a future limited by physical problems that would never improve. Yet Sarah and Benjamin continued. Whether from lack of knowledge about preventing conception, religious prohibition against such prevention, or the very human desire to create family despite impossible odds. The first 4 children had established a horrifying pattern. The medical record would show that they were only the beginning. Garrett's initial visit in March 1897 had been prompted by rumor, but what transformed his curiosity into obsession was a letter he received 3 weeks later from Martha Coombs. The midwife, burdened by years of silent witness, had finally sought outside guidance. Her letter described not 4 children but 8, with 4 more births having occurred between 1895 and 1896, while Garrett remained ignorant of the family's existence. He returned to the Hollow in early April, this time prepared with measurement instruments, photographic equipment borrowed from a colleague, and a determination to document everything with scientific precision. What he found exceeded even his expanded expectations. The 4 additional children displayed conditions that pushed the boundaries of medical possibility. One boy, age 2, possessed organs arranged in mirror image to normal human anatomy, a condition called situs inversus that Garrett had only read about in European medical journals. Another child had vertebrae so malformed that her neck could not support her head without assistance. Garrett spent a week conducting examinations, filling 3 notebooks with observations. He measured skull sizes, documented skeletal abnormalities, and tested reflexes and mental responses. The parents cooperated fully, perhaps hoping that medical attention might somehow help their children. Benjamin, in particular, seemed desperate for answers, asking repeatedly if doctors in cities might have treatments or explanations. The physician's excitement at documenting such an unprecedented case warred with his growing ethical discomfort. These were not laboratory specimens, but suffering human beings trapped in bodies that betrayed them daily. Yet the scientific value seemed undeniable. He drafted a detailed report and sent copies to 3 prominent researchers: Dr. William Osler at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Charles Davenport at Harvard, Horatio Wood in Philadelphia, all men known for their work in heredity and developmental abnormalities. The responses, when they arrived months later, proved bitterly disappointing. Osler's reply was polite but dismissive, suggesting that Garrett had likely exaggerated the severity of conditions or been deceived by the parents about blood relations. Davenport's response carried undertones of accusation, implying that a country doctor lacked the training to accurately diagnose such complex conditions. Only Wood showed genuine interest, though his letter raised disturbing questions about whether the parents might be more closely related than they claimed, suggesting shared ancestry as the only logical explanation for such catastrophic results. Garrett fired back letters, defending his observations and providing additional documentation. He sent photographs, though the primitive equipment captured only crude images. He included measurements, timeline charts, and copies of Martha's birth records. He emphasized that neither parent showed any indication of shared ancestry, that their backgrounds traced to completely different regions, and that their individual conditions alone might explain the hereditary disaster playing out in their children. The scientific establishment's skepticism stung, but Garrett refused to abandon his investigation. He began researching every medical text he could obtain through library exchanges, searching for similar cases in recorded history. What he found were scattered references to individual conditions, never to a family where multiple severe abnormalities appeared across every single child. The medical literature offered no framework for understanding what he was witnessing. By autumn 1895, before Garrett's involvement, Sarah had given birth to a 5th child with a cleft palate so severe that feeding required constant intervention. The 6th child, born in early 1896, had limb development so disrupted that one arm ended at the elbow, while the corresponding leg extended only to mid-thigh. Each new birth seemed to introduce novel catastrophes, as if the parents' genetic material was combining in endlessly creative patterns of malformation. By the winter of 1895, after the birth of their 5th child, Sarah had grown desperate. The midwife, Martha Coombs, noted that both parents began taking advice from a neighbor named Elias Burke, a recluse who claimed to have studied old mountain remedies passed down from his grandfather. A man who, he said, helped fix children born wrong. Burke insisted their affliction was not of blood, but of blocked vitality, something that could be corrected through an alignment of humors. He sold Benjamin a crude tonic made from crushed lead filings, foxglove leaves, and alcohol, promising it would thin the heavy blood and make their next child whole. Benjamin, too trusting and too desperate, took it daily for weeks. Sarah, though hesitant, began taking her own dose mixed with molasses after Elias's wife swore it had restored fertility to barren women in her family. The tonics burned their throats and caused violent sickness, but they believed suffering was a necessary cleansing. When the 6th child was born the following spring, his left arm ended abruptly at the elbow and the right leg twisted backward at the knee. The deformities were worse than anything Martha had seen. Her journal entry from that night was brief and almost cryptic. They sought healing from what poisons the earth itself, and the earth answered. Garrett later discovered remnants of the tonic in the Caldwell cabin. The bottle labeled, B & Sons Pharmacopoeia Remedies Lexington. Its ingredients, long outlawed by the turn of the century, modern analysis decades later would reveal its contents: lead acetate and foxglove extract, both capable of causing birth defects. It was one more tragedy born not of cruelty, but of naive hope, 2 outcasts clinging to superstition in a world that had already abandoned them. Garrett's frustration peaked when he realized that academic medicine would not take his findings seriously without direct examination. He needed someone with institutional authority to witness what he had documented. In December 1896, he wrote directly to Dr. Loulis Barker, a rising researcher at Johns Hopkins known for challenging conventional medical thinking. This letter took a different approach. Garrett acknowledged the case sounded impossible, admitted